Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so cruel, that it completely changes how you see someone you thought you knew? What if I told you that sometimes the most powerful lessons about humanity come from the people we least expect, and that a single response to humiliation can transform an entire family forever? Prepare yourself for one of the most eye-opening stories you'll ever hear about privilege, dignity, and the moment when a billionaire father realized he had raised a monster. This is the story of how a cleaning lady's response to the worst humiliation imaginable made a grown man cry and changed the course of 3 lives forever. Because sometimes it takes losing everything we think matters to discover what actually does. Robert Harrison was 52 years old when he finally saw his daughter for who she really was. And he was horrified. Owner of Harrison Real Estate Empire, one of the largest luxury property development companies on the West Coast, with a net worth of $3.2 billion, Robert lived in a 15,000-square-foot mansion in Beverly Hills worth $45 million. He drove different luxury cars depending on his mood: a Rolls-Royce Phantom for business meetings, a Ferrari 812 for weekend drives, and a Bentley Mulsanne for social events. His walk-in closet was larger than most people's bedrooms, filled with custom suits that cost more than the average American's annual salary. But behind all that wealth was a man drowning in guilt and regret. 3 years earlier, his wife Catherine had died in a tragic accident while rushing to one of Madison's school events that Robert had missed due to a business meeting. Since then, Robert had tried to compensate for his absence and his wife's death by giving his daughter everything money could buy. Madison Harrison was 16 years old and had never heard the word no in her entire life. She had her own black American Express card with no limit, a brand new Mercedes G-Wagon for her 16th birthday, a bedroom that was bigger than most apartments, and a closet filled with designer clothes worth more than $200,000. She attended the most exclusive private school in Beverly Hills, where tuition cost $65,000 per year, and her classmates were the children of celebrities, tech moguls, and old Hollywood money. Madison had grown up believing that wealth made her inherently superior to others, and that people who worked for her family existed solely for her convenience. She treated the household staff like they were invisible, or worse, like they were inconveniences that disrupted her perfect life. She had gotten 3 previous housekeepers fired by complaining to her father about imaginary problems, simply because she didn't like their attitudes or the way they looked at her. Robert, consumed by guilt about Catherine's death and his own emotional absence, consistently took Madison's side in these conflicts. He convinced himself that his daughter was just particular about her environment, not recognizing the entitled monster he was enabling. It was on a humid Tuesday morning in August when Carmen Rodriguez first walked through the front door of the Harrison mansion. She came through an elite domestic staffing agency that charged premium rates for what they called discreet, high-quality household management. Carmen cost $2,800 per month, which was actually below market rate for Beverly Hills, but she had specifically requested to work for a family with children. Carmen was 48 years old, a small woman with graying hair that she kept neatly pulled back, and hands that showed the evidence of years of hard work. She wore a simple blue uniform and carried herself with quiet dignity that most people in Beverly Hills didn't bother to notice in their household staff. What Robert and Madison didn't know was that Carmen Rodriguez held a PhD in literature from the University of San Salvador, and had been a respected professor for 15 years before her life was torn apart by violence. When gang threats against educators forced her to flee El Salvador, she left behind her career, her home, and most of her family. She came to America with nothing but hope and determination, working whatever job she could find to survive while sending money back to care for her elderly mother, and to pay for her son Miguel's medical school tuition at UCLA. Every dollar she earned cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors was carefully budgeted, half for her family's survival, half for Miguel's education. Carmen had cleaned houses for wealthy families for 3 years, always professional, always invisible, always grateful for work that allowed her to stay in the country legally and support the people she loved. She had learned to endure condescension, casual racism, and being treated like furniture. But nothing had prepared her for Madison Harrison. On Carmen's first day, Madison was lounging by the infinity pool, scrolling through her phone and ignoring the homework scattered around her chair. She glanced up when Carmen began cleaning the glass doors leading to the patio and immediately made a face of disgust. "Dad!" Madison called loudly, not caring that Carmen could hear every word. Why did you hire someone so old? She looks like she can barely carry a vacuum cleaner. And why doesn't she speak English properly? I don't want to have to repeat myself when I tell her what to do. Robert, who was on a conference call in his home office, waved dismissively at Madison without really listening to her complaint. This small gesture told Madison everything she needed to know. Her father wasn't going to interfere with, however, she chose to treat the new housekeeper. Carmen continued cleaning without responding, but something cold settled in her stomach. She had worked for wealthy families before, but the casual cruelty in Madison's voice was something different. This wasn't just class-based indifference. This was active malice. Over the following weeks, Madison began what she considered an entertaining game of testing how much abuse Carmen would tolerate. She would deliberately spill drinks on freshly mopped floors, drop food on carpets that Carmen had just vacuumed, and leave messes in bathrooms immediately after Carmen cleaned them. "Oops," Madison would say with fake sweetness. "I guess you'll have to clean that again. That's what we pay you for, right?" Carmen would simply nod, gather her cleaning supplies, and start over. Her silence seemed to infuriate Madison more than any argument would have. Madison escalated her behavior when she realized that Carmen never complained to Robert. She began making comments about Carmen's appearance, her accent, her immigration status, and her family. "I bet your family is really proud that you clean toilets for a living," she would say with a cruel smile. "Do they know that this is the best job someone like you can get in America? Or did you lie to them about what you actually do here?" Carmen would respond only by continuing her work, but Madison could see the pain in her eyes, which made the cruelty even more satisfying to her. The psychological torture continued for 2 months. Madison would accidentally knock over garbage cans that Carmen had just emptied, would critique Carmen's cleaning techniques loudly enough for neighbors to hear, and would make phone calls in Spanish using crude phrases she'd learned online, thinking Carmen didn't understand the insults. Robert occasionally witnessed these interactions, but he was so preoccupied with business deals and his own emotional avoidance that he interpreted Madison's behavior as typical teenage brattiness. When Carmen tried once to gently mention that Madison seemed unhappy with her work, Robert brushed off her concerns. "Madison's been through a lot since her mother died," he said, not really looking at Carmen. "She's just adjusting to having new people in the house. She'll warm up to you eventually." But Robert had no idea how dark his daughter's behavior was becoming. Madison began documenting her humiliation of Carmen on social media, posting videos of messes she created with captions like, "When the help needs help understanding their job," and "Training day for the new cleaning lady." Her wealthy friends found these posts hilarious, encouraging Madison to create more content. The breaking point came on a Saturday in October when Robert was scheduled to fly to New York for an important acquisition meeting. Madison saw this as the perfect opportunity to host a party that would cement her social status among the most elite teenagers in Beverly Hills. She invited 30 of her wealthiest classmates for what she called an authentic Beverly Hills experience, which meant unlimited access to her father's wine collection, his luxury cars for Instagram photos, and entertainment that included treating the household staff like props in their wealthy fantasy. Carmen was scheduled to work that Saturday, deep cleaning the house for what Robert thought would be a quiet weekend. She had no idea that Madison had planned the party specifically to coincide with her presence, seeing Carmen as part of the evening's entertainment. The teenagers arrived in vehicles that cost more than most people's homes: Lamborghinis, Maseratis, and custom Range Rovers. They wore clothes that could pay for a year of college tuition, and carried handbags worth more than Carmen's annual salary. Madison had prepared for this evening carefully. She wanted to show her friends what real power looked like, and to her, power meant the ability to humiliate someone with complete impunity. She had even researched new ways to degrade Carmen, practicing her cruelest remarks in the mirror. As the party grew louder and messier, Carmen continued her work, cleaning up after teenagers who treated the mansion like their personal playground. They spilled wine on white furniture, ground food into Persian rugs, and left messes in every room, laughing as Carmen quietly followed behind them with cleaning supplies. "Look how well trained she is," one of Madison's friends said loudly. "She doesn't even complain when we make more work for her." Madison smiled with pride. "I've been teaching her how things work in a real American household. Some people need more training than others." The final humiliation was planned as the evening's grand finale. Madison had positioned several friends with phone cameras around the living room, all focused on the antique Persian rug that had belonged to her grandmother, a priceless family heirloom worth over $50,000. Carmen was on her hands and knees, carefully cleaning wine stains from the edges of the rug, when Madison approached with a full glass of red wine. "Hey, cleaning lady," Madison called loudly, making sure every phone was recording. Carmen looked up from her work, and Madison deliberately poured the entire glass of wine directly onto the center of the rug, the dark liquid soaking into fabric that was older than America itself. The room fell silent except for the sound of wine dripping onto the marble floor below. Then Madison's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "Clean it up, you worthless immigrant. This is what people like you are good for. You exist to clean up messes that your betters make." The teenagers erupted in laughter, their phones capturing every second of Carmen's humiliation. Madison continued, her voice getting louder and more vicious. "This rug is worth more than you'll make in 10 years. You better pray you can get that stain out, or I'll make sure my father takes it out of your pathetic paycheck." Carmen stood slowly, wine-stained cleaning cloth in her hand, looking at the destroyed rug and then at Madison's face, twisted with cruelty and satisfaction. For the first time in 3 months, Carmen spoke directly to Madison in front of other people. "Miss Madison," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation, "I will clean your rug. I will clean it because that is my job. But I want you to know something important." The room had gone completely silent. Even the cruel teenager seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Carmen looked directly into Madison's eyes and continued, "The stain on this rug will come out with the right treatment and patience. But the stain you just put on your soul, that will be much harder to clean." The simplicity and dignity of her response hit the room like a physical force. Madison, expecting tears or anger or begging, was completely unprepared for Carmen's calm wisdom. "You think you're better than me because you have money," Carmen continued. "But money doesn't make you better. It just makes you louder." What none of them knew was that Robert Harrison had returned early from his trip. His New York meeting had been canceled due to a family emergency on the other side, and he had decided to surprise Madison by coming home Saturday night instead of Sunday morning. He walked into his house expecting to find Madison studying or watching a movie, not 30 drunk teenagers and his housekeeper being publicly humiliated in his living room. But Robert didn't announce his presence immediately. Instead, he stood in the doorway, watching his daughter reveal who she really was. He heard every word of Madison's cruelty. He saw the wine destruction of his family's heirloom. He watched his daughter perform hatred-like entertainment for her equally privileged friends. And he heard Carmen's response, dignified, wise, and more mature than anything his 16-year-old daughter had ever said. Robert felt something break inside his chest. This wasn't teenage rebellion or grief-related acting out. This was calculated cruelty, performed for an audience, against a woman who had never done anything but work hard and show respect for his family. "Get out!" Robert's voice boomed across the room like thunder. "All of you, get out of my house now." The teenagers scrambled for the exits, dropping phones and grabbing purses, suddenly remembering that they were in someone else's home without permission. Madison's face went white as she realized her father had witnessed everything. Within 5 minutes, the mansion was silent except for Robert, Madison, and Carmen, who was still kneeling by the ruined rug with cleaning supplies. Robert looked at his daughter and for the first time in 3 years, felt disappointed instead of protective. "Madison, go to your room. Now. We'll talk in the morning." His voice was ice cold. Madison tried to argue. "Dad, it's not what it looked like. She's just a cleaning lady. I was just..." Robert cut her off. "Go. Now. Before I say something I'll regret." After Madison left, Robert turned to Carmen, who was quietly gathering her cleaning supplies. "Carmen, please. Leave the rug. Sit down. We need to talk. If you believe that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the people we least expect, leave the word dignity in the comments. Make sure you subscribe because what Carmen tells Robert next will change everything you think you know about wealth, worth, and what it really means to be rich." Carmen set down her cleaning supplies but remained standing. "Mr. Harrison, I understand if you need to terminate my employment. Your daughter has made it clear that my presence is unwelcome in your home. Robert shook his head. Carmen, please sit down. I owe you an apology, and I owe you an explanation. Reluctantly, Carmen sat on the edge of the couch, still wearing her wine-stained uniform. Robert sat across from her, and for the first time since she'd been working in his house, he really looked at her not as household staff but as a human being. What my daughter did tonight was unforgivable, Robert began. But what's worse is that I enabled it. I saw signs of her behavior toward you, and I chose to ignore them because dealing with Madison's problems felt harder than ignoring them. Carmen listened without speaking, her hands folded in her lap. Robert continued. I lost my wife 3 years ago, and instead of learning how to be a better father, I tried to buy Madison's happiness and avoid conflict. I turned her into a monster, and I let her turn you into her victim. Mr. Harrison, Carmen said quietly, your daughter is not a monster. She is a child who has never learned that other people have feelings, struggles, and dignity that deserve respect. That's not her fault, it's yours. The brutal honesty of Carmen's words hit Robert like a physical blow, but he knew she was right. You're absolutely correct, he said. I failed as a father and you paid the price. But I want you to know something, Carmen. What you said to Madison tonight about the stain on her soul being harder to clean than the stain on the rug, that was the wisest thing anyone has said in this house in 3 years. Carmen was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised Robert. Mr. Harrison, may I tell you who I really am? Robert nodded, confused by the question. My name is Dr. Carmen Elena Rodriguez. I hold a PhD in literature from the University of San Salvador. For 15 years I was a professor, teaching young people about empathy, critical thinking, and human dignity through the stories that define our cultures. Robert stared at her in shock. You're a doctor? A professor? Then why are you? Carmen smiled sadly. Working as a housekeeper? Because when gang violence threatened educators in my country, I had to choose between my career and my life. I chose life. I came to America with nothing but hope and determination. I clean houses to survive, to care for my elderly mother back home, and to pay for my son's medical school education at UCLA. He's going to be a doctor, Mr. Harrison. A real doctor who saves lives. Not just someone who teaches about literature. Robert felt tears forming in his eyes. Carmen, I had no idea. You've been overqualified for this job from the beginning, and my daughter has been treating you like someone whose life has less value than hers, Carmen finished. And that, Mr. Harrison, is the lesson your daughter needs to learn. What do you mean? Robert asked. Carmen leaned forward slightly. Your daughter doesn't understand that intelligence, dignity, and worth aren't distributed based on bank account balances. She thinks poverty equals stupidity, and wealth equals superiority. She's never learned that circumstances don't define character. I've worked for other wealthy families, Mr. Harrison. I've seen entitled children before. But Madison's cruelty is different. It's calculated, performed, and enjoyed. That's not grief or teenage rebellion. That's learned behavior. Robert was crying now, something he hadn't done since Catherine's funeral. Carmen, what can I do? How do I fix what I've created? How do I teach her what you just taught me in 5 minutes? Carmen was quiet for a long moment, then said something that would change the course of all their lives. Mr. Harrison, I have a proposal. But it will require you to trust me completely. And it will require Madison to experience something she's never experienced before. What kind of proposal? Robert asked. Carmen smiled. Let me teach your daughter what I taught university students for 15 years. That every person has a story, a struggle, and a dignity that deserves respect. But she'll have to learn it the hard way. I want Madison to work as a housekeeper for 1 month. Not in your mansion, not with your safety net, but in real homes for real families earning real wages. I want her to understand what it feels like to be invisible, to be looked down upon, to have her worth judged by her job instead of her character. Robert was stunned. You want Madison to work as a cleaning lady? Carmen nodded. I want Madison to discover that the woman she humiliated tonight isn't just the help. She's someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's hero. I want her to learn that respect isn't earned by how much money you have, but by how you treat people who can't do anything for you. And if she learns that lesson, Carmen continued, then maybe she can become the kind of person her mother would have been proud of, instead of the kind of person who finds entertainment in other people's pain. Robert looked at this remarkable woman, a PhD who cleaned his toilets, a former professor who endured his daughter's cruelty with dignity, a mother who sacrificed everything for her son's future, and realized that Carmen Rodriguez was the wisest person he'd ever met. "Carmen," he said, "I accept your proposal, but I have a condition of my own." Carmen raised her eyebrows questioningly. "I want to hire you not as our housekeeper, but as Madison's tutor. Personal development, character education, life skills, whatever you think she needs to become a decent human being. I'll pay you $15,000 per month, provide housing for your family if you want to bring them to America, and fund your son's medical school education completely. Because what my daughter did to you tonight was unforgivable, but what you're offering to do for her despite that treatment, that's the kind of generosity that changes lives." Carmen was quiet for a long moment, tears forming in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison, why would you do all that for me?" Robert smiled through his own tears. "Because 3 hours ago, I thought I was a successful man with a difficult daughter. Now I realize I was a failed father with a cruel child. And you're offering to help me fix the most important thing I've ever broken." "But Carmen," Robert continued, "I need you to know something. What you're proposing, making Madison work as a housekeeper, it's not going to be easy. She's going to fight you, hate you, and probably try to get you fired 100 times. Carmen smiled. "Mr. Harrison, I've spent 3 months enduring your daughter's worst behavior while cleaning wine stains out of priceless rugs. Teaching her empathy while she earns minimum wage cleaning strangers' homes will be much easier than what I've already survived." Robert laughed despite the emotional intensity of the conversation. "You're remarkable, Carmen. Madison has no idea how lucky she is that you're willing to help her instead of just walking away." Carmen stood up. "Mr. Harrison, I'm not doing this for Madison. I'm doing this for every Carmen Rodriguez who will work in her house someday, for every person she'll encounter who has less money than she does, and for the memory of the professor I used to be who believed that education could change hearts." Robert stood up as well. "When do we start?" Carmen smiled. "Monday morning. Madison's education in humility begins with learning how to clean a house that isn't worth $45 million, for people who don't know her last name, for wages that won't buy her a single designer handbag." That night, Robert didn't sleep. He spent hours thinking about the conversation with Carmen, about Madison's cruelty, about Catherine's death, and about how completely he had failed as a father. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt hope that things could change. The next morning, Robert called Madison to his study for the most important conversation of her life. She entered expecting to be grounded or to lose some privileges, not realizing that her entire worldview was about to be challenged. "Madison, sit down. We need to talk about last night." Madison immediately went into defensive mode. "Dad, those kids were just having fun. Carmen is just sensitive. She probably doesn't understand American humor. I wasn't trying to hurt her feelings." Robert held up his hand to stop her. "Madison, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Last night, I watched you deliberately humiliate a woman who has never done anything but work hard and treat our family with respect. I watched you destroy a family heirloom for entertainment. I watched you perform cruelty like it was a talent show." Madison's face was getting red. "Dad, she's just the cleaning lady. She works for us. I was just..." Robert's voice got louder. "Stop. She is not just anything. Her name is Dr. Carmen Rodriguez. She has a PhD and was a university professor for 15 years, before she had to flee her country due to violence." Madison looked stunned. "That's impossible. She cleans toilets. She can barely speak English. She's just..." Robert slammed his hand on the desk. "She speaks 4 languages fluently. She has a son in medical school at UCLA. She's more educated than most of your friends' parents. And you've spent 3 months treating her like garbage because you assumed that someone who cleans houses must be stupid or worthless." Madison was speechless for the first time in years. Robert continued. "Madison, you have become everything your mother and I never wanted you to be. You're cruel, entitled, ignorant, and completely lacking in empathy. You think wealth makes you superior to other people, and you're wrong." "But Dad," Madison said weakly, "we are superior. We have more money, better education, nicer things. That's just reality." Robert stared at his daughter, realizing how completely he had failed her. Madison, wealth is a circumstance, not a character trait. Intelligence is distributed randomly, not based on bank account balances. And dignity is something every human being deserves, regardless of their job or economic status. Robert took a deep breath. Carmen has offered to teach you these lessons, but not in the way you might expect. Starting Monday, you're going to work as a housekeeper for 1 month. Real work, real hours, real wages. For families who don't know you're a Harrison. Madison's mouth fell open. What? Dad, that's insane. I'm not going to clean other people's houses. I have school, I have social commitments, Robert cut her off. You have nothing more important than learning how to be a decent human being. Carmen will supervise your work and your education. You'll live in a modest apartment, take public transportation, shop at regular grocery stores, and understand what life is like for the majority of people in this country. Madison started crying. Dad, this is cruel. You're punishing me for being honest about the class differences that exist. You can't make me do this. Robert's voice was firm. Madison, I can and I will. And if you refuse, I'll cut off your credit cards, sell your car, and you can figure out how to survive on your own. But, Robert continued, his voice softening, if you complete this month of education with Carmen, if you learn the lesson she's trying to teach you, and if you demonstrate that you understand why your behavior was wrong, then I'll help you become the kind of person who uses wealth to help others instead of hurting them. Madison was sobbing now. Dad, please don't make me do this. I promise I'll be nicer to Carmen. I'll apologize. I'll never treat her badly again. Please don't humiliate me like this. Robert felt his heart breaking, but he knew this was the most important decision he'd ever made as a father. Madison, humility isn't humiliation. Learning empathy isn't punishment. Understanding how most people live isn't cruel, it's necessary. Carmen is offering you a gift that no amount of money can buy. She's offering to teach you wisdom, character, and compassion. She's offering to help you become worthy of the privileges you've inherited. Robert stood up. The choice is yours, Madison. You can spend a month learning valuable lessons about humanity from one of the wisest people I've ever met. Or you can figure out how to survive in the world without your trust fund. But either way, the Madison who destroyed that rug last night is not the Madison who's going to live in this house going forward. Madison looked at her father through her tears and realized that for the first time in her life, he was serious about following through on a consequence. She had 2 choices. Accept Carmen's education plan or lose everything she'd taken for granted. Don't miss what happens next, because Madison's first day working as a housekeeper will shock you. And the lesson she learns from the family she works for will change her life forever. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to show you what real transformation looks like. Madison spent the rest of Sunday in her room, alternating between rage, disbelief, and terror. She called her friends, expecting sympathy and support, but their reactions surprised her. When she explained what her father was making her do, instead of outrage, several of her friends said things like, maybe it'll be good for you. And you were pretty mean to that lady. Even her closest friend Sophia said, Madison, I love you, but watching you pour wine on that rug while screaming at the housekeeper made me uncomfortable. It was kind of cruel. Madison hung up the phone, realizing that even her privileged friends thought she had gone too far. Meanwhile, Robert and Carmen spent Sunday planning Madison's month of education. Carmen had contacted 3 middle-class families in different neighborhoods, families she knew through her network of domestic workers who needed temporary help and were willing to participate in this unusual arrangement. The first family is the Johnsons, Carmen explained to Robert. Mike is a teacher. Susan is a nurse. They have 2 kids and a 3-bedroom house in Burbank. They both work full-time but need help with deep cleaning and organization. Madison will work for them for a week. The second family is the Garcias. Single mother, works 2 jobs, 3 children under 10, small apartment in East LA. Madison will help with childcare and housework for a week. The third is the elderly Kowalski couple in Pasadena. Retired, limited mobility, need help with tasks they can no longer manage safely. Robert listened to these descriptions, realizing that his daughter had never even met people like this, let alone worked for them. Carmen, what if she quits after the first day? What if she's rude to these families? Carmen smiled. Then she'll learn that rudeness has consequences when you don't have a trust fund to fall back on. Monday morning arrived like a storm. Madison came downstairs wearing her most expensive casual outfit, $300 jeans, a $150 t-shirt, and $400 sneakers. Carmen took one look at her and shook her head. First lesson, Madison. When you work for a living, you dress for the job, not for Instagram. You need clothes that can get dirty, shoes that are comfortable for standing all day, and hair that stays out of your face while you work. Carmen handed Madison a bag with simple clothes, plain jeans, cotton t-shirts, and basic sneakers. Change into these. And remove all that jewelry. When you're cleaning houses, expensive jewelry just reminds employers that you have more money than they do. Madison wanted to argue, but the memory of her father's ultimatum was still fresh. She changed clothes and looked at herself in the mirror, shocked by how ordinary she looked. For the first time in her life, nothing about her appearance announced her wealth or status. Carmen drove Madison to the Johnson house in her 12-year-old Toyota Camry. This is how most people travel, Madison. No leather seats, no climate control, no luxury features. Just reliable transportation from point A to point B. The Johnson house was a modest 3-bedroom home in a middle-class neighborhood. It was clean, well-maintained, and filled with evidence of a busy family life: children's artwork on the refrigerator, sports equipment by the door, family photos on every surface. Susan Johnson met them at the door, a tired-looking woman in her 40s who worked night shifts at the hospital and was clearly grateful for help. "You must be Madison," she said kindly. "Carmen told me you're learning about the service industry for a school project. That's really interesting." Madison realized that Carmen had created a cover story that protected her identity while still allowing her to experience real work. "Thank you for letting me help," Madison said awkwardly, unsure of how to interact with someone who wasn't household staff. Susan led them to the kitchen, where the day's tasks were laid out: deep cleaning the house, organizing closets, washing windows, and preparing dinner for the family. "I have to sleep during the day because I work nights," Susan explained. "Mike will be home around 4, and the kids get back from school at 3:30. "Madison," Susan continued, "have you done much housework before?" Madison shook her head. "Not really, no." Susan smiled. "No problem. Carmen can teach you. Most of this is just attention to detail and patience." For the first time in her life, Madison spent 8 hours doing physical labor. She scrubbed bathrooms, mopped floors, cleaned windows, and organized closets. Her back ached, her hands got raw from cleaning chemicals, and she was exhausted in a way that no amount of shopping or socializing had ever made her feel. But something unexpected happened. As Madison worked, she began to notice things about the Johnson family that she'd never observed about any family before. Family photos showed camping trips and birthday parties that were clearly homemade, rather than professionally planned. The children's bedrooms were filled with books from the library, toys that were well-loved rather than constantly replaced, and artwork that suggested creativity over expensive lessons. When Mike Johnson came home from teaching, he thanked Madison warmly for her help and asked her thoughtful questions about her experience. "Carmen tells me you're learning about different kinds of work," he said. "What's been the most surprising part so far?" Madison found herself answering honestly. "I didn't realize how much skill it takes to clean efficiently, or how tiring it is to be on your feet all day." Mike smiled. "Most people don't realize that physical work requires intelligence, planning, and endurance. Society tends to assume that if work doesn't require a college degree, it must be easy." When the Johnson children came home from school, Madison watched them interact with their parents with genuine affection and respect. They helped set the table for dinner, talked about their school day, and seemed genuinely happy despite living in a house that was smaller than Madison's bedroom. At dinner, Susan and Mike included Madison in their conversation, asking her opinions about current events, her interests, and her plans for the future. They treated her like a guest rather than hired help, which was more respect than Madison had ever shown Carmen. That night, driving back to the small apartment where Madison would be staying during her month of education, Carmen asked her, "What did you learn today?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, then said, "The Johnsons seem really happy, but they don't have very much money." Carmen nodded. "What do you think makes them happy?" Madison considered this. "They seem to actually like each other." and they appreciate what they have instead of complaining about what they don't have. Interesting observation, Carmen said. What else did you notice? Madison was surprised to find herself thinking deeply about the question. Susan and Mike both work really hard, but they still make time for their kids. And their kids actually want to spend time with them, not just ask them for money. Carmen smiled. Madison, you just identified something that many wealthy people never figure out. Money can buy comfort, security, and opportunities, but it can't buy love, respect, or genuine happiness. Those things have to be earned through how you treat people. The second day at the Johnson house, Madison began to see her work differently. Instead of feeling humiliated by physical labor, she started taking pride in doing tasks well. When Susan complimented her on how clean the bathrooms looked, Madison felt a satisfaction she'd never experienced from any of her previous accomplishments. On her third day, something significant happened. Madison overheard Susan on the phone with her sister, talking about financial stress. I don't know how we're going to pay for Emma's summer camp, Susan was saying. Mike's school district cut his hours, and the hospital hasn't given nurses a raise in 2 years. Madison learned that the money the Johnsons were paying her, $15 per hour, was stretching their budget, but they had hired her because Susan desperately needed help to maintain their home while working night shifts. The money that Madison spent on a single lunch at school was what Susan earned in a full day of saving lives at the hospital. That evening, Madison asked Carmen, how much money do most families like the Johnsons have? Carmen explained about median household income, the cost of living, and how most American families live paycheck to paycheck despite both parents working full-time professional jobs. Madison, Carmen said, Susan saves lives every night at the hospital, and Mike shapes young minds every day at school. They contribute more to society than most billionaires, but they struggle to pay for their daughter's summer camp. Does that seem fair to you? Madison had never thought about fairness in terms of social contribution versus financial reward. No, she said slowly. It doesn't seem fair at all. Carmen nodded. Now you're beginning to understand why treating people with respect based on their character rather than their bank account isn't just nice, it's morally necessary. By the end of her week with the Johnson family, Madison had experienced something completely foreign to her previous life. She had earned respect through hard work, kindness, and reliability. Susan and Mike genuinely liked her, not because of her family's wealth or social status, but because she had proven herself to be helpful, respectful, and hardworking. On Friday evening, Susan gave Madison an envelope with her wages, $600 for the week. Madison, you've been wonderful. If you ever need work in the future, we'd be happy to have you back. Madison stared at the envelope, realizing that this was the first money she had ever earned through her own labor. The second week brought Madison to the Garcia household in East LA, where she would be working for Rosa Garcia, a single mother with 3 children under 10. Rosa worked as a hotel housekeeper during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed with maintaining her own home. Rosa's apartment was smaller than Madison's walk-in closet, but it was spotlessly clean and filled with evidence of a mother's love, children's drawings taped to walls, library books stacked everywhere, and a kitchen table that served as homework station, craft center, and dining room. Thank you for helping me, Rosa said in accented English. My children, they need someone to watch while I work extra shifts this week. My regular babysitter, she got sick. Madison realized that Rosa was trusting her with the most important people in her life, her children. Working with the Garcia children taught Madison something she had never experienced: the responsibility of caring for people who depended on her. She helped 7-year-old Carlos with his homework, played educational games with 5-year-old Maria, and kept watch over 2-year-old Sophia while Rosa worked. Madison discovered that entertaining children without unlimited resources required creativity, patience, and genuine engagement. She couldn't just hand them expensive toys or electronic devices. She had to use her imagination to create activities from household items and library books. But the most powerful lesson came when Carlos asked Madison to help him with a school project about community helpers. We have to write about people who make our neighborhood better, Carlos explained. I want to write about my mom, but the teacher says we should write about police officers or firefighters. Madison helped Carlos research his mother's work, learning that hotel housekeepers like Rosa were essential workers who maintained clean, safe environments for travelers, often working multiple jobs to support their families. Carlos, Madison said, your mom is definitely a community helper. She works harder than anyone I know. When Rosa came home from her first job and saw Madison helping Carlos with homework while Maria and Sofia played quietly nearby, she started crying. No one has ever helped my children with school before, Rosa said. I work so much, I never have time to sit with them and read. Madison felt something shift in her chest, a feeling she didn't immediately recognize. It was pride, but not the shallow pride of ownership or status that she was used to. This was the deeper satisfaction of knowing that her actions had made someone else's life better. That night, Madison called her father for the first time since starting her education. Dad, she said, I met a woman today who works 2 jobs and still can't afford to take her kids to Disneyland. But her kids are happier than any kids I know. How is that possible? Robert felt tears in his eyes, hearing his daughter ask a question that showed genuine curiosity about others rather than self-centered complaint. What do you think, Madison? He asked. Madison was quiet for a moment. I think maybe happiness doesn't come from having everything you want. Maybe it comes from appreciating what you have and feeling loved. And Dad, Madison continued, Rosa's kids love her so much. They get excited when she comes home. They want to tell her about their day. They help her with chores without being asked. I never did any of that for you or Mom. Robert could barely speak. Madison, it's not too late to change how you show love. Madison's voice was small. I think I've been confusing money with love. Like if you bought me things that meant you loved me. But Rosa doesn't have money to buy her kids things, and they know she loves them anyway. The conversation with her father marked a turning point in Madison's understanding. She began to see her month of work not as punishment, but as education in the most important subject she had never studied: how to be human. Her 3rd week was spent with the elderly Kowalski couple in Pasadena. Stanley and Helen Kowalski, both in their 80s, had been married for 57 years and needed help with tasks that had become physically difficult: grocery shopping, deep cleaning, yard work, and organizing medications. Madison learned that the Kowalskis had both worked middle-class jobs their entire lives, Stanley as a postal worker, Helen as a school secretary, and were now living on Social Security and a small pension. They had raised 4 children, paid off their modest home, and saved what they could, but medical expenses had consumed most of their savings. What struck Madison most about the Kowalskis was their gratitude for small kindnesses, and their concern for her well-being despite being the ones who needed help. Are you eating enough, dear? Helen would ask. You're working so hard and you look thin. Stanley would insist on paying Madison slightly more than they had agreed upon, saying, You deserve every penny, young lady. Working with the elderly couple taught Madison about dignity in aging, the value of lifelong partnership, and the importance of treating older people with respect rather than condescension. She learned that Stanley's stories about his postal route were fascinating glimpses into how their neighborhood had changed over decades, and that Helen's memories of working in schools provided wisdom about child development that no textbook could match. But the most important lesson came when Helen had a medical emergency during Madison's 3rd day with them. Helen fell in the bathroom and couldn't get up, and Stanley was too frail to help her. Madison had to call 911, assist the paramedics, and stay with Stanley at the hospital while Helen was evaluated. Sitting in the emergency room waiting area, holding Stanley's hand while he worried about his wife of 57 years, Madison experienced empathy in a way she never had before. This wasn't abstract sympathy for people she didn't know. This was genuine concern for specific people she had come to care about. Stanley, Madison said, tell me about the day you met Helen. Through his worry, Stanley smiled and began sharing the story of their first date, their engagement during his military service, their wedding in her parents' backyard, and 57 years of building a life together through joy and hardship. Madison realized that Stanley and Helen Kowalski had something she had never seen in her social circle. A love that had grown stronger over time, built on shared experiences, mutual support, and genuine partnership. They had created wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. A lifetime of love, family, and meaningful contribution to their community. Helen's medical issue turned out to be minor, but the experience changed Madison's perspective permanently. That night she called Carmen. I think I understand now why you said wealth doesn't make people better. The Kowalskis have been rich their whole lives, just not in money. Carmen smiled, hearing the wisdom in Madison's voice. What kind of wealth do they have? Madison thought carefully. Love, respect, purpose, gratitude, and, I don't know how to describe it. Peace? Like they're not constantly wanting more or competing with other people. They're just happy with the life they built together. Madison, Carmen said, you just described what many people spend their entire lives searching for. The Kowalskis found it by focusing on relationships and contribution, rather than accumulation and status. As Madison's month of education neared its end, Carmen arranged for her to spend her final week working with a family that would bring her story full circle. A wealthy family who needed temporary help while their regular housekeeper was on vacation. The Morrison family lived in Manhattan Beach in a house that was expensive but not extravagant. David Morrison was a successful attorney. Jennifer was a marketing executive, and they had 2 teenage children. They were wealthy, but unlike Madison's family, their wealth hadn't isolated them from normal human experiences. Working for the Morrisons, Madison observed how a wealthy family could maintain privilege while also demonstrating respect, kindness, and social responsibility. Jennifer Morrison treated Madison with the same courtesy she would show any professional colleague. David included Madison in family conversations at dinner, asking her opinions and sharing stories about his own experiences with manual labor during college. The Morrison teenagers, Emma and Jake, were polite, helpful, and genuinely interested in Madison's month-long education project. That's so cool that you're learning about different kinds of work, Emma said. I've been wanting to get a summer job, but my parents think I should focus on SAT prep. Madison watched the Morrison family interact and realized that wealth didn't automatically create entitled monsters. The Morrisons used their privilege responsibly. They donated to charity, treated service workers with respect, and were raising their children to value hard work and empathy. Mrs. Morrison, Madison asked one day, how do you keep your kids from becoming spoiled? Jennifer laughed. Constant vigilance and regular reality checks. We make sure Emma and Jake understand that their comfort comes from our hard work, not their inherent superiority, and we require them to contribute to the household and the community. On Madison's final day of work, Jennifer Morrison said something that completed Madison's education. Madison, you've been wonderful to work with. Carmen tells me this month has been a learning experience for you. What's the most important thing you've discovered? Madison thought about the question seriously. I learned that I was confusing having money with being valuable as a person. I thought people who worked service jobs were less intelligent or less important than people like my family. But this month I met some of the smartest, kindest, hardest working people I've ever encountered. And I learned that respect isn't something you can buy or inherit. It's something you earn by how you treat other people, especially people who can't do anything for you in return. Jennifer smiled. Those are valuable lessons that many wealthy people never learn. You're lucky to have figured it out at 16. Madison nodded. I'm lucky that Carmen cared enough about my character to teach me, even after I was horrible to her. That evening, Carmen and Madison drove back to Beverly Hills for Madison's reunion with her father. During the drive, Carmen asked Madison to reflect on her month of education. Carmen, Madison said, I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I can put into words. I treated you terribly because I thought your job made you less valuable than me. I was wrong about everything. Carmen pulled over and turned to look at Madison. What were you wrong about? Madison took a deep breath. I was wrong to think that money equals worth. I was wrong to treat you like you were stupid just because you work as a housekeeper. I was wrong to assume that people who do physical labor are less intelligent than people who inherit wealth. But mostly, Madison continued, tears in her eyes, I was wrong to think that being cruel to someone who couldn't fight back made me powerful. It actually made me weak, ignorant, and ugly inside. Carmen reached over and took Madison's hand. Madison, understanding those mistakes is the first step toward becoming the person you want to be. But knowledge isn't enough. How are you going to use what you've learned? Madison was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised even herself. I want to go to college for social work or education. I want to work with families like Rosa's, help kids like Carlos with their homework, and maybe teach other wealthy kids what you taught me. And Carmen, Madison added, I want you to know that you're the smartest, strongest, most graceful person I've ever met. You took someone who was awful to you and turned her into someone better. That's not just forgiveness, that's magic. When they arrived at the Harrison mansion, Robert was waiting in the foyer, nervous about seeing his daughter after a month of transformation. Madison walked through the door looking different. Not just because she was wearing simple clothes instead of designer outfits, but because something in her posture and expression had changed. She looked directly at her father and said, "Dad, I need to apologize to you for becoming someone you couldn't be proud of. And I need to thank you for caring enough about my character to let Carmen teach me how to be better." Robert hugged his daughter, feeling that she was somehow both the same person and completely different. "Madison, tell me about your month." Instead of complaining or asking for sympathy, Madison spent 2 hours telling her father about the family she had worked for, the lessons she had learned, and the person she wanted to become. "Dad," Madison said, "I want to use our money differently. Instead of just buying things for myself, I want to help families like the Garcias and the Kowalskis. And I want to make sure that people like Carmen never have to choose between using their education and supporting their families." Robert looked at Carmen, who was listening with pride and amazement. "Carmen, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. You took my entitled, cruel daughter and helped her discover empathy, humility, and purpose. How can I ever thank you?" Carmen smiled. "Mr. Harrison, watching Madison discover her own capacity for kindness and growth has been the most rewarding experience I've had since leaving my teaching career. She doesn't need to thank me. She needs to use what she's learned to make the world better." 6 months later, the Harrison family looked completely different. Madison was excelling in her junior year of high school, but more importantly, she was volunteering at a literacy center in East LA, tutoring children whose parents worked multiple jobs. She had used her own trust fund money to create college scholarships for the children of service workers. Robert had promoted Carmen to director of the Harrison Foundation, a new charitable organization focused on supporting immigrant families and providing educational opportunities for underserved children. Carmen's son Miguel was completing his medical degree with full financial support from the foundation. Madison's bedroom, once filled with designer clothes and expensive gadgets, now contained books about social justice, photos of the family she had worked with, and plans for the community center she wanted to build after college. The Persian rug that had been stained with wine during Madison's party of cruelty had been professionally cleaned and restored. But Robert decided to leave one small, faint mark visible as a reminder that some stains serve as lessons rather than mistakes to be erased. On the anniversary of that terrible night, Madison organized a dinner at the Harrison mansion for all the families she had worked with during her month of education. The Johnsons, the Garcias, the Kowalskis, and the Morrisons all gathered in the same living room where Madison had once performed cruelty for entertainment. But this time the room was filled with laughter, gratitude, and genuine friendship. Madison introduced each family to her father, sharing stories about what she had learned from them and how they had changed her life. Rosa Garcia brought her children, who were now enrolled in an after-school program that Madison had helped fund. Carlos was thriving academically with the tutoring support Madison had arranged. The Kowalskis had their medical expenses covered by a healthcare fund Madison had established for elderly couples. During dinner, young Carlos Garcia stood up and said, "I want to thank Madison for helping me understand that my mom is a community helper. Because of Madison, I wrote the best essay in my class about how important housekeepers are." Stanley Kowalski raised his glass to Madison, who reminded an old man that young people can still surprise you with their capacity for growth and kindness. Susan Johnson added, to Carmen, who saw potential in a young woman who everyone else had given up on. But the most meaningful moment came when Emma Morrison, now in college, said, "Madison, meeting you taught me that privileged kids have a choice. We can use our advantages to create more inequality, or we can use them to create more opportunity for others. Thank you for showing me which choice leads to a life worth living." As the evening wound down, Madison found herself in the kitchen with Carmen, cleaning dishes together, something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "Carmen," Madison said, "do you remember what you told me that night when I poured wine on the rug? You said the stain on my soul would be harder to clean than the stain on the rug." Carmen nodded. "I remember." Madison smiled. "You were wrong about one thing. The stain on my soul wasn't harder to clean, it just required the right teacher. You didn't just teach me how to clean houses, Carmen. You taught me how to clean my heart." Carmen hugged Madison. You did the cleaning, sweetheart. I just showed you where to start. 2 years later, Madison Harrison graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. But her graduation speech wasn't about academic achievement or future career plans. Instead, she spoke about a night when her cruelty was so complete that it took a former professor working as a housekeeper to teach her the difference between being rich and being valuable. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez saved my life, Madison told the audience of wealthy parents and privileged students. Not by giving me money or opportunities, but by showing me that real wealth comes from the relationships we build, the kindness we show, and the contributions we make to others' lives. I spent 16 years thinking that having money made me better than people who didn't have money. I was wrong. Having money just makes you louder. Being better requires becoming kinder, more grateful, and more useful to the world around you. Madison concluded her speech with words that Carmen had taught her. The measure of our success isn't what we accumulate for ourselves, but what we contribute to others. And the truest wealth isn't what we own, but who we love and who loves us in return. In the audience, Robert Harrison wiped away tears of pride, not for his daughter's academic achievement, but for the person she had become. Next to him, Dr. Carmen Rodriguez smiled, knowing that her most important student had finally learned the most essential lesson: that every person has dignity that deserves respect, regardless of their circumstances. After graduation, Madison enrolled at UCLA to study social work, planning to spend her life helping families navigate poverty, immigration, and educational barriers. Carmen returned to teaching, accepting a position as professor of education at UCLA, where she developed curricula about empathy, social justice, and character development. The Harrison Foundation became one of the most respected charitable organizations in California, known not for the size of its donations, but for the personal involvement of its founders in the lives of the people they served. And in a small apartment in East LA, Carlos Garcia kept a photo on his desk of the day Madison helped him with his homework. He was now in high school, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and planning to become a teacher like Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, who had shown him that education could transform lives. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the people we least expect, and sometimes the greatest transformations happen when we're brave enough to admit we were wrong and humble enough to learn from those we once dismissed. If this story reminded you that every person deserves respect regardless of their job, their background, or their bank account, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time when someone surprised you with their wisdom, kindness, or strength. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about transformation, redemption, and the power of human dignity. Because the most important wealth any of us can build is the wealth of character, compassion, and connection with others. And that kind of wealth multiplies when we share it, creating riches that no economic downturn can ever take away.